Welcome to another Velocity Juice podcast. I'm Flavia.
And I'm Delilah.
We're very proud to have with us today Alexej from Alphawell Brands. And I'm very excited. I've met Alexej a couple of times before, and we have been involved in an accelerator not so long ago. I'm very happy to have you here. Welcome, Alexej.
Thanks so much. Excited to be here.
Yeah. And I'm very keen to just understand a little bit about you. I know that our viewers and our listeners will want to know your journey. So tell us what brought you here? What is your journey as an entrepreneur, as a D2C entrepreneur and founder? So tell us.
Cool. Yeah, happy to. So I guess I spent almost 10 years in finance initially, did investment banking, and then spent 6 years on the buy side, investing in venture capital, both funds and early stage companies, and then spent 2 years in private equity. And I always thought, it's so amazing to actually build something. But I always thought, okay, it's super, super difficult because I've seen many, many failures and very few successes, especially in Europe and the UK. And ultimately, the kind of jump into entrepreneurship came through trying to raise a cannabis fund, which ended up being a CBD marketplace as a first iteration of our business model. And today, as you rightly said, we are not just D2C, we actually an omni-channel platform. We own 2 brands as Alphawell Brands, and we also own a marketing agency.
Amazing.
So just to be clear, so what are those brands?
So we own still the CBD marketplace called Alpha Green IO, which will be at some point a brand in itself. And then we acquired in January this year a scented candles brand called 96 North. It's 90% US sales, which is kind of great to be right now rather than other currencies. The agency is called New Optima.
Oh, amazing.
I guess for our founders, early stage founders tuning in and wanting to learn a little bit more about your journey. How did it happen? How did you transition from your kind of corporate role and then investor role into an entrepreneur? What really triggered that move?
So I really like to be in finance. I really like investing in companies. But what's important to note is that unless you're at the bottom of the cycle and you are one of the founders of a fund, it's very tricky to actually make a, let's say, life-changing kind of money event for you, right? So that means you can have a nice lifestyle in finance.
Yes.
But to really, make kind of like hundreds of millions, for example, it's very, very difficult. And so you actually have to build something on your own. That's number one. The second is there are a lot of opportunities out there and there is a lot of capital out there. So, investing, you can kind of always do it. But building something, you, let's say, have only a limited time and, a few periods in your life where you could do it, let's say.
So what advice would you give to other founders who are wanting to start?
I would give the advice to, if you think you have certain skills, which means don't do it straight after university, as so many suggest. But if you actually have certain skills already and you are itching to solve a problem out there, or you see, let's say, an arbitrage opportunity, or you see a really interesting model in one country, but in your country, that model isn't there yet, then try, jumping in and raising finance and trying to solve it.
Can I just be a contrarian here? I've seen over the years in my investment days, I've seen founders coming straight out of university and being very successful. One is an insurtech company that has raised quite a substantial amount of money and scaled wonderfully over the past few years. I'm very interested because this is such an important kind of advice that we see so many investors giving to founders. When you're a recent graduate, you have very limited in terms of losing out. The world is your oyster, and you can surround yourself with great advisors, great investors, and you can make it. What makes you think that that's not the right pathway? And there's just so much focus on entrepreneurship in our ecosystem.
Yeah. Well, because most of the students and most of the media is covering only success stories, and raising money and scaling doesn't actually mean it's a successful business. It's actually
Agree.
being a profitable business and having an exit is what really is the success. And that's actually very, very rare. If you look at all the statistics, I think Economist did a recent deep dive on that, that actually the probability if you're in your late 30s or early 40s to have a successful business is much, much higher than a university dropout. Having said that, of course, there are lots of headlines, Snapchat, Facebook, etc.
There are a lot of them.
Absolutely, but that's because media loves this kind of stuff. They don't cover the 99% of companies who are actually, profitable, not multi-billion businesses, but actually successful in itself as well. And I think the mindset is now, with this crisis, changing from, okay, growth at all cost, let's keep raising every 8 months, and then there is unlimited money out there, to actually, how do I not raise so I don't work basically for the VC, but keep my freedom, keep my independence, and actually build a proper business.
I think we're segueing into a topic that is very close to my heart, which is really how companies capitalize and how they get from A to B. And obviously within Velocity, we fund and finance D2C businesses, so direct-to-consumer businesses. How did you think about your company when you started? Was it about your own capital, or did you actually plan from the day one, I'm going to go out there and at this particular milestone, get some capital and get some investors? What was the rationale? What triggered you to go on one pathway or another?
Yeah. That's a great question. And to be honest, what you guys at Velocity are offering is basically what I would actually also recommend to a lot of founders instead of going to VC straight away. But yeah, looking at my, let's say, journey, I was quite fortunate that I've been an investor myself in VC and PE, so I had a very good network of investors.
Great.
And so it was very easy for me to actually raise at a fairly high valuation, which diluted myself not too much, which is kind of what I would also recommend. Try not to dilute yourself too much, which is where the alternative financing products come in.
But clearly you fundraised in the boom,
Correct.
In lockdown when everything was going for the roof. How would you approach this in our market right now? And what's happening in our market? What are you seeing?
I mean, every day is something else, right? So It's very difficult to actually answer this question. But look, I would say if you have, it's all about speed, basically. There is no point trying to spend a year on raising money if you can spend that year working on your product. Equally, if you, can raise something quickly at maybe not the best terms, you should do it, because again, having a small percentage of a pie is better than to have a big percentage of no pie.
It's a very interesting one. We see companies, myself and Delilah, we see companies every single day. Founders from very early, they just started a few months ago, to founders that have been in the industry and built amazing businesses. And many of them have VC backing. VCs, which we obviously all know and love in our ecosystem. But one of the things that it's always quite apparent to me is that there's no really good understanding. And I think that there's the perception that equity is cheaper than anything else. How do you agree with that?
No, I don't agree. I think it's just that initially you can't get debt because the debt provider needs some sort of security. But if you can get debt without paying any interest or anything, if you would be
But
able
you
to
can never get debt without interest.
exactly,
right?
exactly, which is why you don't get debt if you're super
But there's
early
a
stage.
cost to equity.
There is a cost to equity, yeah.
And it's a very high cost.
For sure.
For listeners and founders kind of tuning in, I think that there is a cost. If somebody buys 5% of your company at 5 million and 5 years later you have 20 million of revenue and the company's worth, I don't know, let's say 100 million valuation wise, then that 5%, it's 5 million.
Yeah.
So you already can see that for maybe 500,000, 200,000, 300,000 of capital, you're paying 5 million. So nothing's cheap and nothing is free. Equity is not free.
Yeah.
How would you go about scaling your business? What is your kind of strategy for growth?
Yep. So we raised in total £3.5 million. We call it kind of pre-seed, since I'm still the only person on the board, still the only director. And now
Congrats.
we are actually, thank you. And we are now actually in the break-even zone. We are on a 3 million run rate now. And to be honest, we are looking at alternative financing solutions now, as we discussed with you. To fund our growth, we have a solution for our working capital, which is basically where we don't have to tap into new equity raises to fund the cash flow and to fund kind of the inventory. But obviously, looking at acquisitions, etc., that's where we would also probably look at debt facility or credit lines, as opposed to raising equity and diluting ourselves at that moment.
Amazing. And then so going back to looking at what's going on in the market, obviously you have two brands that are in the health and wellness sector. Mm-hmm. So you've got aromatherapy candles and then CBD based products. So, I mean, what would you say, what brand, obviously you just launched the aromatherapy candles company. So what company would you say though, with how that's been performing compared to the CBD based products? What's been performing the best?
Yeah. And that's more the question, almost should you build something or should you acquire something which is already working? So and this is again also going back to the whole entrepreneurship question.
Yeah.
To be honest, when we acquired 96 North, which we acquired it at 2x profit multiple, which we scaled now 3 times in 9 months. Yeah. That's an amazing example where you basically buy already product market fit, product channel fit, and then just put marketing expertise and budget into it to scale it. Versus with the CBD marketplace, this is basically the approach where we saw a problem in the market, i.e. a massively uneducated audience with a massively bad quality amount of brands and products out there. And we said, okay, let's create this marketplace to allow the consumer to get education and then have the choice of getting access to the best quality products out there. So, sounds great, sounds logical, but it's actually very difficult to scale because Facebook marketing and Google ads were forbidden in the CBD industry. And so only SEO worked, which we did really well, and also launched our agency on the back of that. However, it's still slower than, putting money into, let's say, an Amazon growth channel, which can give you, 7-8 times return on ad spend, basically. So I would say, looking at what's already working and then trying to improve it is almost easier than trying to build something from scratch.
Okay.
And so looking at 2 brands at the moment, we are putting more resources into 96 North at the moment. Alpha Green still remains, let's say, important to us, but more from a future optional value, because we're seeing Germany legalizing cannabis in 2024, which means that there will be
a change.
Yeah. I mean, that's at least what the coalition agreement says. Obviously, if when they do it and how they do it, it's still a big question. But in terms of when they do it, in terms of what the actual distribution channel will be to consumers. But we're basically looking at Alpha Green as that brand which has already brand recognition in the CBD space.
Yeah.
We're launching a cannabis accessories product down the line, actually branded, by Alpha Green. And we basically play the long-term game in cannabis because, and this is again how also you build business and how you build brands, and what most brands actually did wrongly, and that's why there are so many bankruptcies in the D2C space, is because nobody understands that building a brand takes actually time. If you look at, there was this, famous Twitter post recently going viral, right? But it's basically, if you look at Lululemon, it's 40 years old. If you look at Hermes, it's 120 years old.
Oh, I've seen there's an amazing graphic. We'll make sure that we'll share it with this one.
Right. Yeah. So basically, you need time. You can't just expect that in 1 or 2 years you're gonna build a unicorn business as a D2C brand. That's just not possible.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting because through lockdown, in my kind of previous engagements, I have actually experienced firsthand in my portfolio companies going from 2-3 million to a few of them in the consumer space to about 30 million in like less than 12 months, and one of them in about 18 months to just over 100 million in sales. It was obviously, they were amazingly experienced founders that had done it before, but I do feel that is possible. It's just lockdown has been such a black swan of an event. Nobody seen it coming, and I think that everybody switched to online buying virtually for everything. So do you think that can be done outside a situation like the lockdown, that growth story? Because we clearly have seen it happening.
We've seen it happening, but you had usually negative unit economics, and the only reason they managed to pull it off because they kept raising more funding to put into Facebook and Google advertising, thinking that the LTV will at some point be much, much bigger than the CAC. And what I'm arguing and what we are seeing in the market, and this is why most of the D2C brands are down 90% in the market, is that the LTV calculation was extremely, extremely optimistic, where they were just saying, okay, lifetime value times revenue, or lifetime, time versus times, okay, we have to record it from scratch, but lifetime times average order value, for example, right?
Yes.
Which is not really how you should calculate the LTV. It's, your gross margin times lifetimes adjusted for churn, which is a much, much smaller number, which you then divide by CAC, which you also should have, adjust for all the promotional activities you do in the future with your future marketing discounts, etc., which then, works out as a very different number. And that's just to get to contribution margin 3, not even talking about the OPEX.
Could we just throw like a curveball in the middle, because you're saying something very interesting, about technical calculation can yield a completely distorted view of the future and how much value you can derive for every pound that you spend or dollar that you spend on advertising. Do you think that has been triggered to some extent by venture capital, and all the investors in the space that were going for aggregators, and there was this kind of almost enthusiastic, euphoric spree of buying companies that you clearly have done it at 2 times annual revenues?
Annual profits.
Yes,
we did it.
I've actually heard aggregators buying at 5 times revenues value.
That's ridiculous.
And they were buying tens of companies. So do you think that some of that is because there has been a lot of investor attention, and because of that, the valuations have gone up? So companies and founders had to be very smart about the way in which they value their own company. And
I would say the problem in the Amazon aggregator space was actually slightly different. That hype was driven by the multiple arbitrage promised. So founders of aggregators were saying, look, we can acquire companies for, let's say, 2 to 6 times profit multiple. And yes, most of them acquired for 6 times. We acquired for 2 times, but let's say most of them acquired for 6 times. And they raised at 15 times revenue, right? Or let's say, to keep the maths very simple, let's say you raise at, 10 times revenue.
Yes.
You acquire at 5 times profit,
There
right?
you go. There you go.
And let's say your revenue gives you a 20%, profit margin is 20% of the revenue. So you basically suddenly have, you basically raising at 25 times profit and you're acquiring at 5 times profit, right? And that's what the arbitrage is. And so investors were then saying, well, okay, why should we pay 10 times revenue when you raise if you acquire at 5 times profit?
There you go.
And the answer was because we can acquire all these brands really fast and then create so much value to basically plug that valuation gap and justify the valuation.
So it's basically saying, for anyone that is not aware, is that 2 + 2 = 20. That is what we're kind of promising, is that 2 + 2 is usually 4, but there's some future value, about a 16 future value that is being created by the people that were in aggregator.
Yeah, exactly.
By I'm imagining consolidating operations, streamlining processes.
Correct. But ultimately that didn't really work out, right? Which is why all the aggregators are now going bust. So what happened is they acquired at huge valuations. They raised at huge valuations. They acquired at, let's say, attractive multiples. But they acquired most of the companies at the peak of the sales, which since then went down 30-40% and will go even further down. On top of that, they acquired with extremely expensive debt, which is now eating into their cash margin. And their cash margin, because of inflation and supply chain issues, also compressed. And so now they sit basically on acquisitions, which, yes, they acquired cheaply, but still at the extremely peak multiple and peak cycle in sales. And they're struggling now to repay the debt.
I'm absolutely shocked when you said they used very expensive debt. I mean, debt has just gotten a little bit expensive now due to inflation and the pressure we have in our economy. But that was very simple. 2-3 years ago, that was the cheapest thing you can get. So why saying that?
Because it's always in relation to how much cash flow you produce, right?
Okay.
So if you suddenly don't have any cash flow, because you basically don't have any margin, because your costs went up in operations.
Okay.
How are you going to pay back
for
the debt?
disaggregators, the costs should actually go down, because now I have 10 companies that are using a shared pool of resources. So I should be on margins a lot better than pretty much any other individual company that uses their own resources. And now I can acquire a lot cheaper pretty much any service that I want.
That's true.
So,
except that supply chain issues and geopolitical tensions and inflation cost the costs.
And you
to
think
go
that
up.
that is going to continue to be the downfall of aggregators as we know them?
Yeah, because now they sit on hundreds of brands.
Wow.
Which are exposed to all these issues, and it's too late to fix it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's think about it this way. For those viewers and those listeners that are not completely depressed now by the grim prospect, I think it would be good to
Aggregators.
yes.
D2C aggregators, give me some more.
Yes. I almost see the article in a newspaper being written, the title, the grimmest podcast there ever was. I think what would be really helpful is to actually share some some bits of advice that, 3 things that if you started a company, a D2C company now, I know that they're very young entrepreneurs right there in the world thinking, oh, this is my dream. I'm going to, finish university. I'm going to go out there and start my life and build my own business. What are the 3 things that you would do?
All right.
Also, to those, I feel like in the CBD market as well, could you give some advice to some people who are wanting to start their own CBD business? Because that's a difficult market.
Yeah, that's why you should maybe start something in there.
Maybe you should.
But look, okay, let's say 3 things if you want to start your own brand and actually succeed.
Yes.
So first would be, does that product really solve a problem?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think, for example, a lot of the D2C brands who I still think are successful are, for example, companies which are in highly regulated industries such as Hims and Hers with hair loss and erectile dysfunction, for example. Because there is a huge market, for example, behind that. And it's actually not that easy to launch a brand. You actually need, an online pharmacy license, or you have to have a partner, for example.
Okay.
And that's, for example, one area, right? An example where actually that product solves something. The other example is the lifetime value should be higher than the customer acquisition costs. If you look at, for example, certain luxury beauty brands, because the average order value is so high, you can afford to go into certain growth channels, including, influencers and working with influencers, where you can make the economics work, versus launching a supplements business with a £10 capsule product that's probably not going to fly anymore. And then the third point I would say is to have a very strong team behind you. So as a founder, you can only, you have a very limited time capacity, let's say. And so you have to look into hiring the best people, making sure you don't run out of money, and kind of, keeping the vision and thinking about strategy constantly.
In regards to starting your own D2C business, what kind of people need to be part of your team to help scale?
So I would say a critical role is somebody who's very good in growth. So some people call it, head of growth. Some people call it chief revenue officer, which is slightly different to a marketing person. So I would say that's kind of like one of the key hires.
Why are they different from the marketing hire? Especially for the D2C, digitally native brand.
Yeah. So marketing for me is when you already figure out your growth channels, and then you want somebody to do continuous, let's say, engagement, or...
Is it a maintenance work?
Look, I don't want to offend any marketeers there, but it's, it's kind of...
Careful.
It's super valuable, but it's more, let's say, creative plus brand communication almost, what I call marketing nowadays, rather than the growth element. Because growth is all about going through 40 different growth channels, tracking each of them, and then identifying which ones should be the ones where you put more budget into.
Okay, so it's more the sort of programmatic function that you're seeing.
I mean, a growth marketeer is a scientist person more than a creative communications person.
Oh my, so many founders are going to have a field day with that one, because what I find in marketing and in D2C, in this whole ecosystem, is the fact that when we're saying marketing, we're pretty much putting a label on everything from brand experts to communication to social media to the programmatic part. And it's so difficult for founders to get their head around, because when they're putting out their marketing associate or marketing manager, they could get like 100 different profiles of people with 100 different experiences. So I think it's so refreshing to actually hear what the growth, how you would define it.
Yeah.
Because I know that there are a lot of founders out there that would think the growth person maybe does a bit of creative and then he puts the campaign through, and actually should be more the person that kind of does the thinking behind.
Yeah.
And does that sort of capital allocation. Because capital is always going to be
Exactly.
a limiting factor for many companies.
So what other team members then? So growth specialists.
Yeah, look, it depends, of course, on the product, right? Like a lot of brands and products might actually have a very complicated product formulation process, right? So then you might actually need somebody who is, you know, in the weeds of the actual product. Most D2C brands and Amazon brands are on the back of white labeling, basically. Yeah, you have a Chinese manufacturer or European manufacturer, and your value is to drive growth much better. And that's how you then build your brand, rather than you having like an amazing, unique product, let's say, which of course every brand will argue they have an amazing product. So
Yes.
but
That is always true.
ultimately you have, let's say in our case, we have the growth hacker, the head of growth, and then we have functional experts. So we have a head of PPC, we have a head of SEO, we have an email marketing
I
lead,
love it.
and we have an Amazon lead.
Yeah. Wow.
Wow, that means that from the very beginning, many founders have to find quite a lot of resources.
Yeah.
It's clear to me that we've obviously heard some other guests in our series speaking about how easy it is to kind of put a D2C business together and take it online. But actually, it just, the sheer amount of resources and the expertise that you've mentioned, that is something that nobody really appreciates in the beginning.
Yeah, but I would also argue in the beginning you actually don't need all of them. I mean, you can also work with an agency such as New Optima, where you can basically outsource all these things and then have a CEO directly working with us, for example. When you need it is when you really want to scale, and it kind of makes more sense to have it in-house rather than outsourced.
But when is that moment? When is the moment to have it potentially let go of the agency, CEO agency model and think, I'm building my own resources, my own capacity?
Yeah. I would argue it, again, depends of how many channels work for you, how much budget per channel, how many geographies you're present. In our case, the reason we have it in-house is because we actually share our brand talent with the agency, which we have. And therefore, for example, my head of PPC runs 4 other clients in addition to my own brands. And that's why it actually makes sense for us.
Yeah.
If I would be only a D2C brand, you can probably run it with 3 people. That's it. Yeah.
Okay. Is there a revenue figure for potentially some of the listeners and viewers that are slightly more focused on a metric?
I don't think there is. I think it really depends on the channel. You can say 10 million in Amazon in revenues is much simpler to achieve than 10 million on Facebook. Because on Facebook, you have to
Really?
constantly do creatives because people get bored of your creatives. I mean, by Facebook, I mean Meta, which is
Of
Facebook
course,
and
of
Insta
course.
now. But yeah, you need a much larger team to run a 10 million Facebook brand. If that's your main channel, than an Amazon brand. That's why you have so many. So there are 32,000 brands on Amazon which have more than 1 million in revenues and are all profitable.
32,000.
Yeah.
Wow. That is a shocking statistic. How about Meta? Do we know
There
the
are
number?
1% of profitable brands. And I don't think how many, I don't know how, there is no number, right? But you can probably look into the statistic. If Shopify providing some statistics, then you can kind of derive how many, how many merchants use Shopify and how many of them are right now going out of business, you can kind of deduct that number because they're all on Facebook. And when when Apple updated iOS, 60% of that attribution kind of like which you knew got lost. And so suddenly that marketing became really unprofitable. For example. And then you have also new channels coming up like Etsy, TikTok, live stream, you know, and stuff. So you constantly need to be also in the weeds of what's coming.
So what channels are you utilizing then for 96 North?
So 96 North right now, I would say we are 90% on Amazon.
Okay, yeah.
We just launched Pinterest as a channel.
Okay.
We're about to launch Etsy.
Yeah.
And we started writing a lot of content to also start having SEO as a channel, because over time we still think, let's say with the exception of Amazon, that SEO is one of the best growth channels for high quality traffic.
So why Pinterest and Etsy then?
It's a slightly different consumer audience. In our case, scented candles, probably 70% of our audience is female.
Yeah.
Pinterest and Etsy is very female. And so the likelihood that we're getting the right audience is actually very high on Etsy and Pinterest. And the second is actually Amazon now rewards external traffic. So without going into technicalities, there's such a thing as attribution, which means if Amazon sees that you get traffic from another source directly to Amazon, Amazon gives you back 10% of the referral rate, so the margin they would usually take, they will give back to you.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So you, as a brand, you're incentivized to drive a lot more traffic to Amazon. Okay.
That's how Amazon is so smart, basically. It's
Yeah.
not necessarily fantastic, it's just Amazon's super smart. Yeah.
I think that we're Amazon is going to be what's left on this planet at the end of it.
But then you also have local and regional marketplaces, don't forget it, right? You have like in the Middle East, you have so many marketplaces. In Asia, you have so many marketplaces. In Latin America, you have like in Poland, you have Allegro. In Germany, you have a bunch. So I would say people shouldn't just focus on Google and Facebook. They should really explore other marketplaces.
But for UK-based businesses, so...
For UK-based businesses, it's amazon.co.uk.
I love it. I think that, you know, obviously you're an expert on SEO and you have your own agency. So the question I have, how much of the effort of a company should go in SEO and how much should go into digital marketing, so paid marketing, paid advertising? I think that is a question on the lips of every founder that we see on a daily basis. One is long term, one is very short term, is revenue in your bank account.
Yep.
How would you approach it, and what advice would you give young founders?
So I would say SEO should be a good portion of your marketing mix, because we actually haven't seen exceptions. Traffic will become cheaper for you if you have a very good domain authority and you can rank really well for your keywords. Having said that, it does take time. So we are looking at 3 to 6 months usually of writing high quality content, which is relevant to the search queries out there. With PPC, so paid ads on Google or Facebook, you can get that traffic much faster, but it will be much more expensive for you. And what I highly suggest right now is almost to look at, rather than like PPC versus SEO, I would say, okay, SEO, and then what else? Is it Amazon? Is it maybe influencers? Like launching maybe a brand together with a creative or content, creator is maybe another way to actually.
So you would encourage founders to really explore a lot more than the PPC universe.
Absolutely, yeah. If you look at, for example, Ryan Reynolds, right, and the gin brand. He and a private equity firm bought a gin brand and he attached himself to that gin brand, making that gym brand very famous and tapping into his audience.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like how you should really be thinking. You shouldn't be thinking, oh, everybody's doing PPC, that's why we should do PPC. You should kind of think, okay, what are the sustainable channels in terms of LTV CAC, correctly calculated?
Yes.
And then what else can you do to unlock an audience cheaply without somebody else doing it already?
Okay. That's amazing. Well, I feel that we've gone through a journey.
Yes.
I do hope that the future is going to be, brighter, that we're going to come out of this slightly uncertain period that we're all going through. And Alexej, it's been a pleasure having you here.
Thank you for coming.
And having
Joining us.
your contrarian opinions delight us and our listeners. But most importantly, we really appreciate working with you, and I'm so excited to find out about all the new initiatives that you bring to the market. And I know that you have your accelerator and a few amazing educational programs for young founders. So we are going to share this with our listeners and our viewers, because I think it's so valuable to be educated on the journey. So thank you so much. And stay tuned for the next episode.
Yes.
Thanks so much. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you.